Welcome to A Conversation with History. I'm Harry Kreisler of the Institute of International Studies. Our guest today is Barry C. Scheck, who is Professor of Law and Director of Clinical Education at the Benjamin Cardozo School of Law at Yeshiva University. He is known for his landmark litigation setting standards for forensic applications of DNA technology. Since 1988, he and his partner Peter Neufeld, work in this area have shaped the course of case law across the country and led to an influential study by the National Academy of Sciences on forensic DNA testing. They co-authored a book with Jim Dwyer called Actual Innocence, 5 Days to Execution and Other Dispatches from the Wrongly Convicted. Barry, welcome back to Berkeley.
Great to be here.
Tell us a little about yourself. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in New York City and in Queens, and then Manhattan. And I was child of the '60s. Probably pretty active in the civil rights and anti-war movement as a teenager. And then went on to Yale University, and there I was involved in the Dump Johnson's caucus at the Yale Law School. I campaigned for Gene McCarthy, then I campaigned for Robert Kennedy. I gave draft cards that were put on the steps of the Pentagon, and we all went around and tried to levitate it. And I worked in the Lindsay administration as an urban intern, and was involved in a lot of political activities. In what's called the '60s, but was really the early '70s, and then I came out here for law school.
Mm-hmm. And what led you into law? Why did you decide to do law as a way of realizing your social and political activism?
Well, because I grew up in an era where one saw that in the civil rights movement, law was an instrument of social change, and was essential to winning the rights of African Americans in the South and across the country, to get the vote, to participate in public services in this country, and it's the great movement of our time. You think back to what's been accomplished in this country within our lifetimes in terms of civil rights. It's far from a completed agenda, we all know, or what's happened in South Africa, which I never believed would occur in my lifetime. It's really extraordinary to think about, and lawyers had a lot to do with it. In fact, we were all probably oversold on the extent to which law could be an instrument of social change. By the time I graduated from law school, there was a whole generation of us that kind of felt like, oh, we'll be able to do that. We're people's lawyers. And then we found out, well, it's kind of hard to find that social space within the law. It's not so easy.
Go back a minute, because I'm curious as to how your parents influenced you in these directions.
Well, my father came from a family in New York City where he had 7 brothers and 1 sister. They grew up on the Lower East Side, and it was one of those poverty situations where if you were the last kid up in the morning, you didn't have clothes. And so he was, didn't even get a high school education, and was a tap dancer. He learned how to tap dance from a black man who was a janitor at a bank where he worked with him, and he danced black, as they say, and he literally was a tap dancer, and he played the Apollo Theater as an act, and the Borscht Belt, and then eventually had singing and dancing schools, and produced early television on the streets of New York for the Dumont Network, which is very few people remember Dumont televisions. And he had a show called Star Time, where there were people that sang and danced, kids that would come out of the dancing and singing schools, sort of vertically integrated. And he wound up managing some of them. So Connie Francis was one of his principal act, and he managed for a while Bobby Darin, Mary Wells, the folk singer Odetta, a great cabaret singer named Hazel Scott, who actually has a very interesting political history to her. So he was in show business.
Yeah. So did y'all talk about politics around the dinner table?
So he was always part of a progressive political movement. Civil rights, and he knew people that were labor organizers, people who were accused of being members of the Communist Party in the 50s and were blacklisted. So I sort of grew up in a household where, this tradition of political activism was alive. And I was basically told, well, you can do anything you want in this world, but first you got to get a license.
That's good.
So I kind of...
So you came to Berkeley to get...
Well, I have to admit that I went to Yale as an undergraduate, and by the time I was finished, we were all so caught up in, the politics of the time. I remember working on the jury selection in the Bobby Seale trial in New Haven. Most people forget that Kingman Brewster, the president of Yale, actually had come out with a statement saying that he didn't think a black revolutionary could get a fair trial in New Haven, which is amazing. He was acquitted, as it turns out. But I never really thought of myself, I'm going to be a criminal lawyer, I'm going to be, that never was really in my thinking. I got into a few law schools. I decided to come here, I must say, because I could become a state resident, and the tuition at one of the top 10 law schools in the country was only $435 a semester, which I actually was able to make playing poker, so that's all true. That was number one. And number two, Berkeley was considered a liberated zone, and I'd never been here. And so I really wasn't going with the idea, gee, I really want to do law now. I was sort of feeling like, I'll go live in Berkeley and hang out on Telegraph Avenue and not have to pay a lot of tuition, and I sort of do law school on the side. That was my original intention. I got much more involved in it, of course.
So where did this interest in bringing science to the law come? Did that just a serendipity, or what? I mean, were you interested in science?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a little unfair. I mean, I did start off, oddly enough, in college as an early concentration in economic history. So I had some interest in history, interest in economics. I actually worked as a research assistant for James Tobin for a while. But I was not, I didn't take any biology. I didn't really take math courses. And I wasn't science-oriented. I was interested, but I never really took courses. I wound up, being an American Studies major. I was, taking courses with Robert Penn Warren, reading all these great books. I was much more interested in literature, in the arts, in cinema, the theater. Those became my principal interests: sociology, psychology. I was not at all oriented towards any of the hard sciences. Here, when I was at law school, I worked for the United Farm Workers Union. I did things on childhood and government with Jack Koons, a professor here, and Steve Sugarman, Robert Mnookin. I didn't constitutional law. I never really thought. I fell into it when I became a public defender back in New York and started doing cases.
I get the sense, as you describe your education, that it was a kind of a generalized consciousness that sort of affected you and radicalized you. It was really the times. Were there specific events that sort of moved you up on the ladder of sort of thinking radically about the world around you?
Well, I don't think. Sure, there were specific events, but I think it's everyone in my generation, had to come to terms with the war in Vietnam, and before that. Had to come to terms with the civil rights movement. Those were the two great movements of our time. And, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Eldridge Cleaver said that. But, it's true. So, I was always, motivated, by the civil rights tradition and, of course, these anti-war activities. So, I was at a lot of these events. The Dump Johnson caucus at the Yale Law School is where the people first got together to campaign for Gene McCarthy. So I was lucky enough to be there and go do that. That brought down a president. Can you imagine? You're 18 years old and you say, well, let's all go and do something. And the president resigns. And, it was actually great because it gave us the feeling that we could change history. So that's a little heady and probably a little arrogant for people, at that age and at that time. But, also we were facing the draft and facing the war and we had to end it. So those things propelled one forward. And, things naturally followed from that. I guess what I was lucky to have is a father, who always saw these things from a point of view of, of having come from a life of poverty and a working class background. So, it was great to work here for the United Farm Workers. That was a very pivotal, consciousness-changing experience. There were some lawyers for the Farm Workers Union that taught a lot about guerrilla law, about being a people's lawyer. That was very useful. I was always probably an over-intellectualized type anyhow, so I kind of had that academic side no matter what I was doing. And so I fell into, the very good social space within the law. I was lucky.
And what, concretely, what exactly, with the law degree in hand, what were the kinds of things that you did beyond what you've already discussed? What led you into to this sort of interface between civil rights and the criminal justice system?
Well, I graduated Berkeley in 1974. And I took the New York and California bars at the same time. And then I worked for the National Lawyers Guild. I was writing a book about electronic surveillance law with a friend of mine in a grand jury book. But I wasn't, I didn't have a job, right? And I wasn't even really looking that hard for a job. And a lot of my friends had become public defenders. So I applied for public defender's jobs, and I got some in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and in New York. And my father was sick, so I came back to New York City and began working as a public defender in the South Bronx. And to work as a public defender in South Bronx in 1975-76, at the time of that movie Fort Apache, is really quite a real-time experience. I mean, that was a pretty tough place to be, but it was also really great, to be in that kind of an office. So a lot of the people that I work with in that public defender's office in the South Bronx were all just like me. They were all politically motivated people. They wanted to be people's lawyers. They came, from all across the country. A lot of great law schools, people of all different backgrounds. And this little group have gone on to become, well-known and very successful lawyers, particularly in the criminal law. It's very interesting. Or even teaching and academics. So it was a great group. I only really did that for 3 years before I began teaching, which is something I didn't intend to get into either, but there was a new law school that had just started in New York City, the Cardozo Law School, sort of to be for Yeshiva University. What Einstein Medical School was to medicine, Cardozo was going to be to law. And I had a friend who was applying for legal jobs. His name is David Rudolph. He's a prominent trial lawyer now in North Carolina, taught University of North Carolina Law School. And he told them, I said, I have a friend, he'd be very good at this, but he doesn't know it. So why don't you, and they called me up and I got on their faculty, not because they really knew anything about whether I could try a case or not, but I kind of went to the right schools. So I began doing clinical teaching, and that was a great opportunity because when you're a clinical teacher at a law school, you're entitled to sort of pick what you want to do. And so I could do any kind of cases I wanted to do with the students. And you could pick law reform matters, things that you really think needed exploration, and have an opportunity to do them in getting a steady, although not particularly huge salary. But that's a good place to be, and a good place to stay intellectually alive, and to have young people kind of keeping you honest about what you're doing as to whether or not it really is socially useful. And, so I found it a very stimulating environment, so I haven't left for 25 years.
So what do you tell your students? What does it take to be a lawyer?
Well, it's a great dilemma. Can you be a good person and a good lawyer? It's a good one to
Well,
think
I wasn't talking about virtue. I had more in mind skills.
Oh, well, skills is the least of it. I mean, if you're going to be a lawyer or a doctor or any kind of professional, I think it's incumbent upon you to do the best you can in terms of developing, skills. I mean, I don't want to put that down. You have to think about it in a broader way. But but what are you doing? Is it socially useful? Is it ethical? Does it give meaning to your life? if you can answer those questions, then you're going to have a work life that stays with you. I think long into your middle age. I guess I'm 53. Does that count as middle age, or does that mean I'm just damn old?
You're getting there.
I'm getting there. Okay.
You're getting there. But are you, from a normative perspective, are you implying that there's a lot about the law that makes you grimace? Or are you not?
Oh, sure. No, what happens if you go into the law thinking, well, I want to use it as a tool for social change, particularly these days, you come up against it and you realize that much of the law is really dedicated towards resolving disputes and keeping our economic system, or the capitalist system, as some would say, running. And there's what are considered public interest jobs. Aren't that many of them comparatively. One of the real dilemmas that we've seen is that the salaries for people going into corporate jobs since I graduated law school compared to today have mushroomed, right? And the salaries for going into public interest jobs, whether it's being a prosecutor, a defense lawyer, a legal services lawyer, any kind of, have stayed very, very low. At the same time, the amount of money that it costs to go to undergraduate college and law school has again mushroomed. So the average student is looking at $70,000 to $100,000 worth of debt compared to when I graduated. So it's an extraordinarily difficult situation. I mean, you turn to these students and you say, you really ought to go into public interest law. You really ought to do social justice. That's what we like to tell people when we give graduation talks. And they're all looking at these huge debts. It's almost hypocritical of us in a way. But that's created a dilemma. I think that's created a real problem. And there's actually some legislation now in Congress to try to do loan forgiveness if you'll do social justice work, which I would include as prosecution, defense, and criminal cases after law school graduation. One of my Berkeley, not classmates, year behind me, Louis Kornhauser, is a professor of law at NYU, has done a very, very good study of this problem in terms of the differential between corporate and private practice salaries and public interest salaries. It's changed enormously since I graduated. It's a different world.
What can make up for today's students' lack of the political and social turmoil that you experienced, and this high you suggested that one got from being part of events and changing the world and so on? They really are lacking that opportunity. So what?
I don't think you're lacking that opportunity.
Yeah.
There's plenty of very worthwhile and important causes to involve oneself in these days.
But it's not as universal, the sense of these. Is it not? I mean, the problems are there. They're all over the place. But there doesn't seem to be a mobilizing force in the way there was in the 60s.
Well, no, that was it's all generational. I mean, there was look, if all these young people faced a draft for the war in Iraq, it'd be a different reaction.
That's right.
I mean, there's not an issue about it.
Yeah. Okay, so then what then led you down this path of bringing scientific insight into the courtroom? Tell us how that came about.
Well, I mean, if one is a competent criminal defense attorney, you have to learn over time how to deal with forensic evidence. So, I mean, and here I'm talking about the social science and science behind eyewitness identification, false confessions, and all kinds of forensic applications. So, over time, as cases demanded it, I would learn something about all these different disciplines and how they intersected with the criminal law. If you do a murder case, you have to know something about forensic medicine. What medical examiners do. You deal with a case that involves evidence from a crime scene and trace materials. You have to learn something about that. So just being, a reasonably competent attorney, wanting to do a good job, I learned things about that. Then what happened was that actually it got involved with one case where we proved a fellow innocent in 1984 named Robert McLaughlin of a felony murder in Brooklyn. It's a mistaken ID case, and the lawyer I worked on that with, Richard Emery, is a prominent civil rights lawyer in New York, sent over a case literally that had come to him, but from the old public defender's office where Peter Neufeld and I worked in the South Bronx. A fellow named Marion Coakley, and we tell the story in our book Actual Innocence, where Coakley was convicted. He had 17 alibi witnesses that he was at a prayer meeting in one part of the Bronx when there was a couple having an afternoon delight in a Bronx motel when somebody broke in, robbed them, raped them, drove off in their car, left a palm print on a rearview mirror. But of course, semen. And the semen evidence was done with conventional serology techniques, and it didn't exclude him, or it should have excluded him, but there were some problems in that. He was convicted, and they asked us to look into the case. And when we looked into the case, along with a serologist who'd been involved in it named Robert Shaler, who was then working at the New York City Medical Examiner's Office, and Bob said to us, well, listen, I'm going to go work soon for a new company called Life Codes, and they're doing something called DNA testing. Why don't we try it on this case? So we tried it, and there wasn't enough DNA to get a result. Bob left the medical examiner's office, and Peter and I said, you know, we proved him innocent other ways. We found this palm print on the rearview mirror of the car that didn't match him. We found a lot of other proof. Coakley was exonerated. But we realized then that DNA was going to be extremely important, and it had not really been introduced in courts yet. So we held a forum at Cardozo Law School involving DNA testing. The first one, I think, in any American academic institution for its forensic application. And then again, somebody from our old office in the South Bronx said, gee, there's a case, they're trying to introduce blood evidence that blood on a watch came from a murdered woman, and that the blood on the watch did not come from the defendant himself. And it was Life Codes, the same operation that Scheller went to work for, and we were asked to do a hearing as court-appointed lawyers, along with students from the clinic, on the admissibility of this evidence. And in the course of that hearing, which took like 4 months, we were able to get pro bono the very, very best scientists in the world to look at the evidence. And we became very involved in this. We knew that it would be important. And our position was that because of certain technical problems, they couldn't say that the blood from the watch came from the victim because it really didn't match. And also they couldn't calculate the statistics correctly. They were doing a bad job of it. But the exclusion that the blood on the watch didn't come from the defendant was scientifically, uncontestable. So we said, well, that's true, right? And even though the prosecution wanted to use it. In the middle of this admissibility hearing, which took a long time and ironically enough was presided over by Judge Jerry Scheinland, who's Judge Judy's husband, who once had a little run as a television judge himself, in the middle of the hearing, the evidence that our scientists came up with was so overwhelming, and that the scientists on the other side said, you know what, you guys are right. And together they wrote a joint statement of experts saying that this technology is very, very important to the criminal justice system. It is being used incorrectly here, and that the National Academy of Sciences ought to develop a study commission to make sure that the transfer of this technology, DNA technology, from medical and research uses to the forensic arena is accomplished reliably. Our witnesses, for example, included Eric Lander, who was at the Whitehead Institute now and at Harvard and MIT, and is probably the principal public person responsible for mapping the human genome, along with a colleague of his, Dr. David Page, who was very famous for his work on the Y chromosome. On the other side was a scientist named Dr. Richard Roberts, who soon after our hearings won a Nobel Prize for his work on restriction enzymes. So they all got together and they said this is what should happen, and indeed it is what happened. The National Academy of Sciences issued this report, and then another report after that. We got involved really at the ground floor with the leading scientists, trying to think through how to use this technology correctly, how to develop standards for it, how to think about civil liberties implications of its use. And so that was a great place to be. We kind of got in on the ground floor of the application of this technology to the criminal justice system. And that was a good place to be. So I didn't know anything about DNA, neither did Peter, and we got educated by the best teachers in the world
So
in the context of litigation. It's extraordinary.
So in a way, this case became a forum for ideas
Yeah, it was a landmark,
about how to change or how to define the legal system's use of this in the future.
Yes, and scientists like Dr. Lander, Dr. David Page, Dr. Conrad Gilliam, especially a brilliant scientist at Harvard, Dr. Richard Lewontin, Dan Hartle. We really, I mean, what an education. Dr. Peter DeStachio, Paul Hagerman, some of the leading geneticists on the planet. We're dealing with these schmendrick lawyers, you know. They say, "Oh, now let me teach you about it. This is how it works." So I got to know, and Peter got to know a lot about a certain narrow area, but in a very interesting way. So it's much better than taking a seminar and taking all these courses. Just have the best people teach you.
Now, in terms of another step in this, obviously you and Peter were involved in the defense of OJ Simpson. So I'm curious, what did that trial contribute to elevating a broader consciousness about how one should proceed with DNA evidence?
Yeah, it's interesting. We actually started the Innocence Project before the Simpson case in 1992 because we realized, as a clinical program at the law school, because we realized that just as DNA could be used to identify the real assailants, it could be used to exonerate people. And, so we knew that, and it was very consistent with the position we took, frankly, in the Castro case, that there were certain technical problems in the way it was handled that had to be overcome, but at the same time, the exclusion, even though the prosecutor wanted to use it, we didn't oppose. And we also knew that this would be an amazing tool to revisit old cases where people have been dragged out of the courtroom screaming, "I'm innocent, I'm innocent, I'm innocent." The Simpson case was something where we became involved initially just as consultants because we knew a lot about this stuff. To Bob Shapiro, Jerry Ullman, ultimately Johnny Cochran was called into the case, and had no intention of ever doing anything with the trial. So we were just telling him this is what it means, these are the potential problems, and then slowly but surely, in a very strange and inexorable way, got sort of drawn in as a lawyer in the case. Now, in some ways, the Simpson case, I think, is a bit misunderstood. I would tell you, having wound up in the end giving the closing argument in the case with Johnny Cochran, that the OJ Simpson trials, as far as I'm concerned, is about one of the worst things that happened to the criminal justice system in America in terms of cameras in the courtroom, which I oppose unless a defendant consents to it, and maybe even a prosecutor consents to it. I think it's potentially a terrible problem. I think it really did terrible things for the way we cover criminal justice stories. It's created this unbelievable ratings machine where when this cable, over-the-air news media suddenly realized, well, if you cover one of these stories that has, sex, celebrities, and murder trials, which have always been interesting to people, you get ratings. And if you get ratings all day, all the time, it completely skews the news coverage. So that became the most publicized trial in the history of our country, probably the planet. So there are a lot of bad things about it and what it said, of our country in terms of race, in terms of the way we cover criminal justice. Oddly enough, though, in terms of the forensic science, there was a silver lining because we never attacked the validity of DNA technology because it is a valid technology. It's a revolutionary technology. The problem in the O.J. Simpson case is the way that the evidence was collected. We were using 19th century evidence collection techniques for 21st century technology, which had the more than the potential, but the reality of producing confounding results. So in the end, the collection and handling of the evidence was the way that we attacked what was produced in the Simpson case. The opponents that we had, who were the DNA specialists, Woody Clark, who's a prosecutor in San Diego, Rock Harmon, who's a prosecutor here in Alameda County, they didn't, in the end, after the trial was over, we all became friends. We actually knew each other and were friendly before that, but allies. Woody and I were on a federal commission that set standards for what, quote, literally, we hand out a pamphlet, millions of them, what every law enforcement officer ought to know about DNA testing, Commission on the Future of DNA Evidence. Now, everyone in the forensic community realizes that the collection and handling this evidence is essential to getting reliable results. You get confounding results if you commingle contaminated. So, for example, they made fun of the idea that evidence handlers ought to change gloves when they pick up items. So now we literally send out instructions to every law enforcement officer: always change your gloves, never put anything wet into a plastic bag, which can cause bacterial degradation and ruin your evidence. The attacks we made, when you think back on it now, everyone in the DNA forensic community looks with horror at the idea that they would take all the different evidence samples and put them on one table, the blood drops from Bundy, the glove, and then Mr. Yamauchi would open up a tube with OJ Simpson's blood and have an aerosol over the table, and he can't even remember whether he changed his gloves or not. That is like unreal to think about today. So that attack actually changed forensic science in a very profound way because, you see, everybody understood that if you're going to get anything out of DNA testing, you have to collect the evidence correctly. You have to make sure that the labs are handling it correctly so that you don't screw up these results. On the other hand, and at the same time, I should say, DNA technology is really good, and it has shown that other forensic assays, bite mark evidence, hair comparisons, are just very unreliable methods of analysis. In the area of forensic science, it has exposed a lot of really unreliable methods and has really made the law enforcement community realize that forensic scientists shouldn't be police, cops, and lab coats. What we have failed to do in this country is develop a tradition where forensic science is an independent third force in the criminal justice system, where the same kind of rigorous standards that we require from medical scientists and research scientists are applied to forensic scientists. And we have a lot of problems in crime labs in this country. At least 2 chapters in our book, one about junk forensic science, so-called, and the other about fraudulent forensic science, are here because we have problems everywhere. I mean, today we have lab scandals all over the place. We describe one in West Virginia involving Fred Zane, who dry lab, didn't even do the experiments in like 330 cases at the very least. And then
he just faked the data? Or?
Faked the data.
Yeah.
He had inconclusives. He just gave the results he wanted, didn't even do the tests, moved on to San Antonio, Texas, where he did the same thing. Joyce Gilchrist, we mentioned in our book in the first edition, we have a new one coming out in the fall. She's now been caught in Oklahoma City, a known, ersatz forensic scientist who was caught, giving results that don't make any sense, where she may not have even done the work, and she's been fired, and now they're looking at 3,000 cases. They've winnowed them down to another about 300. We have lab scandals today in Houston, Texas. Harris County. If Harris County, Texas, were a state, it would have executed more people in this country than any state other than Texas. It executes more people than any other site in the Western world. And in Harris County, Texas, we now have a scandal involving a bad, unaccredited DNA laboratory that is getting results that convicted an innocent man named Josiah Sutton. We've now determined it with additional DNA tests. We have a ballistics lab there that is getting unreliable results in case after case. And what has to happen there, it's a huge scandal, is that every case done by the bad DNA analysts and every case done by the people that were doing fraudulent or grossly incompetent ballistic work has to be re-examined. I mean, that's extraordinary. And so we're having these scandals in Florida, now in Indiana last week, various places across the country. So what DNA testing has done, and in part the work we did in the Simpson case, is changing the whole way that forensic science operates, hopefully for the good. Because what people have to understand is, in terms of a crime lab, and frankly in terms of all these other issues, nothing convicts an innocent person faster, than a crime lab that doesn't get it right. But at the same time, every time an innocent person is convicted, the real perpetrator is out there committing more crimes. So our movement is really about good law enforcement. I can't think of any more important issue in terms of good and effective law enforcement in this country than cleaning up the crime labs.
In a way, the work that you and Peter and the Innocence Project has done has held up a mirror to the criminal justice system in a way, and really revealed its flaws, its scars, and all of the corruption and organizational deformities that make the system not work. What do you see as the primary resistance to changing the system? What's at work in you're not achieving more in this short time, given the fact that you're bringing truth to the courtroom?
Well, I mean, I have to look back at it another way. We've achieved a lot. The interesting thing about these DNA exonerations is not that DNA can exonerate somebody who's innocent and help identify the real perpetrator. Only 20% of major criminal cases have any biological evidence where you can perform a DNA test. The important issue is what are we going to do about all those other cases, the other 80% that have mistaken eyewitness identification, false confessions, other forensic assays that are unreliable, ineffective and incompetent defense lawyers that are underfunded that don't do the job, police that lie, and prosecutors that cross the line. What about those cases? What about capital punishment? That's where the legacy of the Innocence Project lies, because we can learn from the cases where we have all these exonerations about what these causes of wrongful convictions are and how to remedy them. That's what our book's about. Each one, we talk about eyewitness identification. There are ways that you can make it more reliable. False confessions. There are ways, videotape interrogations, you can make them more reliable. And so we have a whole program, a whole agenda of reform, and it's reframed criminal justice issues in very important ways. So we're making an enormous amount of progress on that front. In terms of why, in a particular case, when you walk in the door with DNA evidence that exonerates somebody, you find that police and prosecutors resisted, even if they didn't try the case in the first place. And we found a lot of that. Although in many instances we have prosecutors and police that come forward and say, look, we want to do the right thing. I'm a minister of justice. That's my job. I want to correct my mistakes. But that's hard for human beings to do. And there's a certain confluence of forces that can make it difficult in an individual case, particularly when it involves a heinous crime or certainly a death penalty. And that is, number one, within a community, you have the victims or the families of the victims, and they've been told for years, oh, this is a terrible person, this is an animal, a beast that committed this terrible crime. Prosecutors and police are very reluctant to go back to the victims, understandably, and say, oh, we made a terrible error. I'm going to have to revive this horrible thing that you lived through and make you live through it again. And now, in the case, for example, of a rape victim that mistakenly identified somebody, then they're doubly violated. They're the victim of a crime, and now they have to relive the experience and come to terms with the idea that, by mistake, they may have had a hand putting an innocent person in prison. That's a hard thing to accept. Very few people come to terms with it. We write in our book about Jennifer Thompson from North Carolina, who was this magnificent person, who came forward and really describes the experience in a moving way, and has been a very effective political advocate for our innocence agenda, and also changing. She
was a victim, or
a victim?
A
victim. The Ronald Cotton case. Very, very powerful person. They've made a number of documentaries about it. She's been a very powerful citizen in favor of these reforms. So, you can see that dealing with the victims and their families is very hard. Then there's another unfortunate aspect, and that is that prosecutors and police sometimes feel, well, if we admit that we were wrong in this case, what about the cases that are going on trial now? Are the juries going to think, maybe you have to worry about these eyewitness identifications, these false confessions, that maybe the police aren't telling the truth, that maybe there's overreaching here. They're going to consider innocence and the possibility of it more seriously than they might otherwise. So they feel like it undermines the legitimacy of their efforts. Now, I don't think it does. I think it actually, in the final analysis, ought to enhance it. But that's what they worry about, that it's going to affect the jury in the next case. So for all these reasons, and just, the fact that human beings don't like to admit mistakes, especially important mistakes, that we find resistance in some cases.
Now, as we've talked about your finding this route to truth in the courtroom through DNA. We've talked about the OJ Simpson trial, but interestingly enough, we haven't talked about, and maybe I went ahead of things here, but let's talk a little about the Innocence Project itself, because here you are out of the 60s. You've made it clear that that was a formative experience for you. So you actually set about shaping an organization that could carry the word forward and actually change things. Talk a little about that and how your 60s experience helped you understand what you needed to do. I
think actually we look at it as a kind of civil rights movement and a way to reframe criminal justice issues. I think it was my experience as a public defender that helped the most, because so many of these issues, whether it be mistaken eyewitness identification or false confessions or unreliable forensic science, these were things that we knew about. DNA just became a way to reframe the issue in a fashion that the criminal justice community would understand and react to positively, because you can't argue with a case where we've exonerated somebody, and we have so much to learn from it. This is the greatest data set in the history of our criminal justice system. We're now up to 132 post-conviction DNA exonerations, including 13 off death row, but even more importantly, in a way, tens of thousands of people have been cleared by DNA testing after they've been arrested, but before they were convicted. And there were mistaken IDs and false confessions and bad police work and ineffective lawyering in all those cases. So, we have an amazing data set to work with that scholars and criminal justice professionals will be studying for decades to come. So Peter and I are very lucky, because we were well positioned to understand the significance of it. And we've started our project at Cardozo Law School, but we have colleagues that have been doing this at our friends at Northwestern University, Larry Marshall, Rob Warden, a law professor and a journalist. We work with them. They performed really a miracle in Illinois with those exonerations and the courageous act of Governor Ryan, declaring a moratorium on the death penalty, forming a commission that set up all these reforms that we're talking about, and how you can prevent mistaken eyewitnesses and prevent false confessions and independence of forensic science, better lawyering, all these issues. And then that act of giving clemency was a profoundly important one. So we see these changes in state after state across the country, and particularly the area of capital punishment and this whole notion of a moratorium. I see enormous changes.
So in a way, you actually, the Innocence Project can be seen as both a research project and an instrument for social and legal change.
Sure.
So you're really combining the ivory tower with activism, which is not always easy to do.
Well, no, but that's what's so great. I mean, that's what's great about being a clinical teacher. We don't have that tradition has grown since I became a legal educator. It's very funny. At the University of California at Berkeley, I was part of a student committee that literally retarded the growth of clinics for decades, because we invented something called a clinical semester, where you just go out and you work for somebody. We give you credit. And it really held back the effort to build clinical programs at Bolt, which are now growing and are great. But which is ironic, I became a clinical professor. But I find that the most stimulating because you're not just doing doctrine, you're not just doing ethics. I mean, and the best ethics are the ones where you have real-life problems. And you're not just doing practice. You have to do all of them. And that's very engaging. I mean, I never thought that I would have one job for 25 years. But, you know, it's one job, but look at all these different things I wound up doing. I was representing battered women. I represented that woman, Hedda Nussbaum, in the Joel Steinberg murder case. I, you know, represented Louise Woodward in the so-called nanny case in Massachusetts and learned about head injuries. I mean, what a great thing. You can learn about all these different social and legal and scientific issues as an academic, as a lawyer. This is the best thing about profession.
You've discovered the secret to life, to find a job that lets you think and work at changing the world.
It's almost too consuming, if you must know the truth. I'd like to stop working a little bit.
So what happens, you're suggesting that the end result of all of this is not just to bring science in, but to really reform the legal system. I mean, you're really giving a structural view both of the problems and the possible solutions.
Yeah, we're lucky because this magic bullet, this telescope, so to speak, as our friend Jim Dwyer put it in our book, revelation machine, really gives us a chance to study the system in a way you never could before. And it's a real learning moment, and we should seize it in the criminal justice community, in the legal academic community. So we know that each of these people we get out, and we're really in a race against time because the biological evidence is disappearing or being destroyed or just being thrown away in case after case. I can't believe we found as many as we have at this point. So we have to make a full-fledged effort to get as many out as we can, while at the same time trying to use the lessons of these cases again and again and again to change the criminal justice debate. The big problem we've had in this country is, in the criminal justice area is a lot of reforms that I think professionals of good faith on both sides, I'm talking about police professionals, prosecutorial professionals, defense lawyers, academics, have known ought to be implemented. You can't get there because there was just so much demagoguery going on. Let's get 3 strikes laws. Let's get a death penalty here. Let's ratchet up the punishments. Let's run against crime because politically that's popular, particularly in an era when the crime is rising, but it may not be effective law enforcement at all. And there was not a lot of room for rational debate in the area of criminal justice. One of the really interesting statistics about our friends Jim Liebman and Jeff Fagan at Columbia University, who wrote those 2 great studies about a broken system, a study of capital punishment, and the number of cases where courts have reversed the convictions on the grounds of constitutional error, and sometimes they come back 7% of the cases with not guilty or innocence determinations. But close to 80% of the cases are being reversed by state and federal courts and sent back, and 70% or more of those are not resulting in death sentences. What's fascinating about their study is they find that in certain counties in this country, like Harris County, Hamilton County, Ohio, others, Maricopa County, Arizona, you overproduce death. Those counties that are executing the most people, producing the most death sentences, also getting the most reversals, but most interestingly, they are clearing fewer felony cases than other comparably situated counties. So what that means is law enforcement is not working as effectively. Is it because the political forces in these counties are using the death penalty to divert attention from their failure to clean up crime, or it's because the death penalty is so expensive that they cannot put adequate resources into solving crime, or both? But either way, it's not a good situation.
So, but it's also an argument to appeal to people who are concerned about law and order in some kind of traditional sense.
Everything that we're proposing as solutions to the causes of wrongful convictions are just good law enforcement. Measures that Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, prosecutors and defense lawyers, judges can all support. So we really are, a mainstream movement in this respect, and that's why we get a lot of support. Conservatives, George Will, when he reviewed our book Actual Innocence, and gratefully gave it a rave, and he said, conservatives, this book shows us the criminal justice system is just another government program, so skepticism is in order. And so I think that that's where the importance of this really lies, in being able to cross party lines and generate some reasoned discussion, debate, and analysis of what's wrong with our criminal justice system and what we can do to solve it. It's all good law enforcement.
Your project has very effectively mobilized students and as you're suggesting, the researchers in the academic community. I'm curious about how the public can contribute to this process.
Money.
Money.
We need money.
Okay.
We have to pay for these tests. We have to pay for
Would
running around the country.
Would you like to give an address? You can give an address.
Well, innocenceproject.org is our website.
Okay.
And that really is a pretty good website, and it gives you the information you need about our project and where to reach us, and send, what is it, Warren Zevon, send money, guns, and lawyers?
Okay.
Let's forget the guns.
What about the but let's say people can't help in that way. Are there other ways? I mean, because
Sure.
in a way that you're describing a legal movement that has to become a political movement. Really.
Yes, and there are projects,
Yeah.
innocence projects, all across the country. There's, in fact, here in California, there's one at the University of Santa Clara Law School. Our colleague Koki Rodolfi runs that, and then at the University of California Western Law School in San Diego, Justin Brooks runs that project. And here in California, it was a very good thing that Senator Burton did. They had about $800,000 was dedicated to split among innocence projects at law schools. When they passed a post-conviction DNA bill in California that gave an opportunity for inmates that were wrongly convicted or sentenced to get a DNA test. Now you have a budget crisis in this state, and they've defunded these projects, and so they need help. And that would be a good thing to do.
What does society owe the people who are the innocents? I mean, the people that are being exonerated. What can your project do for them? What can society do for them?
Yeah, this is an extremely difficult problem. In most jurisdictions, when these people get out of prison, they get less in terms of support and programs than people who were guilty and convicted and get out of crimes. Not that they get enough for a decent society, but our clients, many of them, they have no recourse. There are very few states that have post-conviction, post-exoneration compensation bills where, regardless of fault, you can get a certain amount of money for having been wrongfully convicted. These individuals and their families have a lot of trouble getting adequate social services. I mean, they come out invariably, no matter how intact and intelligent and strong and indomitable these people are, and so many of them are just that way. They all have post-traumatic stress disorder. They are all reliving acts of violence that they saw within the prison, and I've never met one of them that could sleep. They are coming back after 10, 20 years of being out of society. Their children are grown if they had them, or their spouses have many instances left. Everything's different. They're kind of caught in this time warp when they re-enter. It is so hard for them. And what we've tried to do is help put together a group called Life After Exoneration. And there's a wonderful doctor here at the University of California, Lori Vollen, is part of this Science and Technology Center here in Berkeley. And we formed this group called Life After Exoneration. We've had 2 sessions with about 70 of the exonerees and their families, where we've carefully gone through their life histories, given them social science instruments to evaluate them as best we could and sort of get them helping each other. But Lori is trying to launch this program here on the Berkeley campus, and we're really hopeful that will take off, drawing upon, frankly, groups of people that are used to dealing with victims of political torture, human rights community, because that's what our clients are in many ways. It's the only way you can understand their experiences, that they didn't do the crimes, and they were in the worst penal institutions in our country, going through horrific experiences as an innocent person. It's much harder to be imprisoned if you're innocent than if you're guilty, psychologically. It really is. And many of them were in, for sex-related crimes, and it's very hard to be an inmate in an institution guilty of a sex-related crime. You do a real hard time that way.
Barry, on that note, we want to thank you very much for being here today and for talking with us about this really very interesting evolution, I guess, of your ideas and the story of how you found the space to really try to change the world.
No,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us for this conversation with history.